we went to the Guinness Brewery like place out in the West Loop here.
Yeah.
And we were like sitting around and talking about it. And I was the only one that worked here at the time.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, guys, like, first I remember being like, well, we got to keep this secret because I'm not going to like, I can't do any work on my company laptop because then like Continuum could own this. But then I got like a little bit further into working here and I was like, Continuum has this built. Like even if we tried, we would so quickly just get eliminated in the market.
Yeah. Continuum company event 2026. What is it, July now? This is your second company all hands that you've been at?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
First time that we've done QBRs with
At
the
all
whole
hands.
company involved. That was your first QBR that you got to do as an AE. What was that like?
I've done a lot of like public speaking and
Yeah.
presenting in the past, and that's always been something that I've been like comfortable with. So that aspect of it wasn't scary.
Yeah.
I think it was I wasn't nervous until probably about 5 minutes before.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, this is real.
Yeah, the whole company looking at you.
And
Yeah.
then I'm standing up there and there's like other shit going on. Like people are like, oh, wait, this. And I'm like, okay, well, can we all shut up so I can just start and get this over with? But then when I got into the flow of it, I could tell I was talking a lot faster than I normally do. And I was talking louder. So clearly, like psychologically, I was nervous, but I couldn't notice that consciously.
You knew your data very well. I actually looked at Ben at one point and I was like, oh, he knows his numbers.
You're a sales guy. You're paid to know your numbers. You know your deals and you know your numbers. Like if you don't do that, what are you doing here?
Yeah, well, that was impressive. Your background is actually really interesting, right? Because you riff on, the industry, just distribution, manufacturing, verticals, buying groups. How did you get all that knowledge? Like, where does that come from? Just your industry and vertical specific knowledge?
Curiosity. And like, I mean, from the years that we spent at Sales Eye, like there was nobody there to teach us that, at least when I was there. You had Kevin if you had questions, but like he wasn't going around and like doling out information. So for me, you get to the point you're a couple months in on the phones and you're like, I got to be able to talk to these guys in the way that they understand things and then like be knowledgeable about the space. Otherwise, this doesn't make any sense. And so it just became like partially driven off of how can I find lists and finding like Supply House Times and when we get the industrial distribution magazines in the office. And then also just like curiosity and just like, okay, well, like what's going on in this industry? What's going on here?
Yeah.
And then it's the way my brain works and like mapping it together and the memorization. And I've just always been good at that. So you just start thinking about it and just riffing in your own head about like, well, what happens if this company buys this? Or like, well, those guys bought this and how much of that market are now they gobbling up? Like what we're seeing now in HVAC and electrical, it's always been there. It was there before I ever entered into distribution in terms of M&A. But like I was really living through it in like building materials when I was calling into it in Sales Eye. So I always had to be looking at like who's getting bought because you'd be calling on a company and then you'd wonder why the guy went dark on you. And then you found out like 2 months later because you got him on the phone or you saw an article. Well, yeah, that's why he stopped answering my calls because they were getting bought. Like,
when you came into this business, you knew a ton about the heavy duty market, more than I did. You were telling me things about it. Was that the first vertical that you really started selling into in your time in distribution?
No, I started selling into packaging. Then I went from packaging to flooring and HVAC. Then we didn't have anyone really selling into building supplies, and I recognized it was a massive vertical, and it was a vertical with a ton of outside sales reps. So I kind of took over building materials as a whole. And then
was it like two-steppers, one-steppers? You include flooring in there?
Like I would say like the two-steppers and one-steppers, you almost call that like roofing or building supply, depending on how you want to segment it out. And then we kind of called building materials as a whole, like flooring, plumbing, building supplies, all of that. And I would just do heavy duty on the side. Like I remember August of 2023 now, I was just like, we didn't have any, like Matthew O'Doherty was calling like the Vipar, like the aftermarket. But there was no one really actively calling into the dealers. And I was like, it was the summer. It was busy season for most of my vertical. I was like, all right, well, screw it. I know the name drops. I know, the value prop here. And I just started ripping into the dealers and then would just keep that on the side.
Well, I say it was a year ago. Maybe we were at Blue Hawk. I remember we were outside at an event
Yep.
in Chicago.
It was it was in New York. It was on a rooftop. And it was at Blue Hawk 2025.
So this would have been, almost, 5 quarters ago at this point then. And you were saying, hey, cores, right? Cores in the heavy duty market. Then we got a call set up with, one of the large ERPs inside of that dealer space, the dealer management space. You and your buddy were actually thinking about like building a cores solution because you knew there was a problem. How did you identify the problem?
I can't take credit for identifying the problem.
Yeah.
So like the backstory of that, Matthew's brother, Michael O'Doherty, who works at one of the big ERPs in the space, when he moved over there from Sales Eye, he'd be on customer call or prospect calls, and they would be asking him, well, what can you do for cores? What can you do for cores? I got $200,000 in cores just eating up, inventory space, and I'm losing money on them. And I guess I kind of always knew it was a reverse logistics transaction, but I never like made that connection.
Yeah.
And so he was the one that had come up with that idea. Like we should build a business around this.
Yeah.
And that was probably when we got to that point was maybe like a month or so before I came here.
Oh, okay.
And I remember
So it was right before you joined.
Yeah, it was like right before we joined. And I remember me, him, Michael Vaughn, who works for us now, and Matthew O'Doherty, who works for us. We went to the Guinness Brewery like place out in the West Loop here.
Yeah.
And we were like sitting around and talking about it. And I was the only one that worked here at the time.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, guys, like, first I remember being like, we got to keep this secret because I'm not going to like, I can't do any work on my company laptop because then like Continuum could own this. But then I got like a little bit further into working here and I was like, Continuum has this built. Like even if we tried, we would so quickly just get eliminated in the market.
Yeah.
So then it was like kind of trying to convince you that it was an opportunity.
Yeah. And some of it's just timing, right? Like
Exactly.
So many markets for us to go after. And how far did you get down, like planning out what the solution would look like and all that?
Very minimal.
Yeah.
Very minimal. It was an idea and we had a meeting, but none of us, we've all been in sales roles. None of us had ever like architected a solution.
Yeah.
Like I knew about ERPs, but like you were at Sales Eye, it's a 3 flat file pull. So I knew there was a master customer file, a master product file, and a master invoice file. Like all these endpoints and all of this other complexity of ERPs, I didn't learn until I came here. So at that point, I was a month into working here. I wouldn't have known where to start in trying to actually architect a solution to say like, this is what we need from the ERP so that we can actually automate these transactions.
Yeah. So you did last quarter, we just started, going into heavy duty market. We did 3 deals in the heavy duty market, mostly on highway type stuff. You did 2 of them.
No, I did 1.
You
Tyler
did 1?
did 2. Yeah.
Okay, you did 1. Sorry. That's
I'd love to take the credit, but
you did 1 of them. What's your biggest learning in the time that you spent in that heavy duty deal cycle and just your time that you've spent in the first, really 90 days in that vertical?
I don't know that it was a learning, like it was always there, but an adjustment is just the pace at which these guys move and the fact that they're always very, very busy. Like they're not slow. We can think of them as slow because they might be slow to get back to you, but it's because they're doing a million things. It's a much leaner vertical,
like their operation of their business.
Exactly. So you talk to a vice president of sales and marketing at an HVAC distributor, and they're doing a lot of stuff, but they have this big team and they can find 30 minutes or they can find 10 minutes to call you back.
They're not going to the warehouse and picking product and shipping. Yeah.
You try and talk to somebody in heavy duty, you got to catch them when they're hot because they're really running that operation in a more hands-on way.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about that vertical is like the long tail of distributors. Like there's a lot of 5, 10, $15 million distributors still around. 1, 2 locations. You don't see that in a lot of other verticals. Like maybe like paper, office products.
Well, even in that, it's like Imperial Dade and Brady. Like I think that space, you have like the Fleet Prides of the world that have gobbled some of them up. But that space is fiercely independent. Like those people are a lot more independent, I think, than maybe a small plumbing supply house.
Yeah.
That being said, it is aging out, and it's ripe for somebody to come in there
Yeah.
and go scoop up 10, 15 little, $5 million distributors and do a platform. I'm not quite sure why it hasn't happened yet, candidly.
I wonder about the margin profile of them, because private equity sees something they're interested in.
They go
They
after
go
it.
after it. But you just haven't seen the private equity roll up like even HVAC, you see it in electrical, you see it in industrial. I can't put my finger on like why has the rate of consolidation not been the same that we've seen in other verticals. I don't know what it is. It's a tough business. That could be it.
I think back to one thing from back in my sales days. I remember Matthew O'Doherty. He was on the phone with a woman trying to get her on for a demo. It was at a trailer dealership.
Yeah.
And she's like, Matthew, nobody wants to be a trailer sales rep anymore. And
Anymore.
yeah.
When did they want to?
I don't know when they really wanted to, but when you look at that vertical, that's the one that you so consistently hear. We can't get enough people.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a vertical, like, yeah, you can go do a roll up, but if you don't have the people, if you can't get employees and can't get high level, like
executives.
yeah, it's not as sexy of a distribution vertical than a lot of the other ones. So if you can't go get the right people from a private equity perspective, you're going to go put all this money into trying to roll this up and maybe it goes nowhere. So I could see that as someone else is going to go do it anyways, but I could see that as like, why would we do that here when there's still opportunities in these other verticals that are more buttoned up, that have people that are going to take those roles because it's a little sexier.
Yeah. I think in the heavy duty manufacturing, you see there's a lot more private equity owned manufacturers. What about the dealer side? Is the dealer side private equity roll up?
It's starting to. So if you look at really, international's the big one of the main OEMs that it's happened to. I'm sure there are some in Mack, Volvo. Obviously, Dog at Freightliner sticks out in my head of like the DTNA ones. They're huge. I would imagine they've got some sort of funding in the background, but for international, the two big ones are Allegiance and Ascendants. They're both Allegiance is all northeastern United States. Ascendants started in the northeast of the United States, and they've expanded through acquisition across the top end of the country, or the northern end of the country. They're both backed. They're sister companies. They're sister roll-ups, essentially. They've gobbled up a ton of the smaller, like 1-2 rooftop dealers that are remaining.
Because private equity is big in the automotive dealership world, right?
Yeah.
So it's an easy map for them to be like, okay, well, if this is happening in consumer land, right? Cars.
Ascendants,
why not heavy duty?
He's not there anymore, but a couple of years ago, Ascendants had a CEO that was brought in by private equity who came from the auto dealer world.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Same playbook.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. Well, it's fun jamming out over the heavy duty market.
Oh, yeah. Pick a market and we could talk about it. So.
Yeah.